Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. We're about to embark on a journey together, a journey that goes far beyond simply practicing your English listening and reading skills. Of course, this story will help you with that. The vocabulary is clear, the narrative is engaging, and it will give you a wonderful opportunity to immerse yourself in the language. But this is about something more. This is about the invisible architecture of our lives. I want you to consider a simple but profound question. Every single day, without fail, you are training for something. You are becoming an expert. The only question is, what are you becoming an expert in? Are you training the small, consistent habits that lead to growth, progress, and fulfillment? Or are you training the subtle, reasonable excuses that lead to stagnation and regret? The story we are about to explore is called The Architect of Echoes. It's about a man named Arthur, who spent years of his life building a prison for himself, brick by silent brick, without ever realizing it. But it is also the story of how he learned to cultivate a garden in the most barren of lands, a garden that ultimately gave him the strength to tear that prison down. And right before we dive in, if you're ready to explore more stories that help you grow while you learn, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I also have a question for you to think about as you listen. What's one excuse you want to stop training? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you and build a community of learners right here. All right? Now get comfortable and let's begin. Let's learn about the choice we all face every single day. The choice between building walls and planting seeds. Part 1. The Comfortable Prison. Arthur Pendleton was not an unhappy man. That, perhaps, was the most tragic part of his condition. He was comfortably numb. His life moved with the predictable rhythm of a metronome, set to a slow, steady beat. Wake up at 7:00 a.m. Eat the same breakfast of toast and instant coffee. Take the 8:15 a.m. bus to his job in a gray, cubicle-filled office where he performed data entry. His title was Data Reconciliation Analyst, a phrase so devoid of passion it felt like a parody. He would stare at spreadsheets for 8 hours, his fingers tap dancing on the keyboard, reconciling numbers that meant nothing to him. At 5:00 p.m., he would take the bus home, eat a microwaved dinner, watch 2 to 3 hours of television, and go to sleep. Rinse, repeat. But there was another Arthur, a version of him that existed only in the faded blueprints of his youth. Young Arthur had wanted to be an architect, not just of buildings, but of beautiful spaces. He dreamed of designing community parks that felt like secret gardens, libraries that inspired wonder, homes that felt like a warm embrace. His old sketchbooks were filled with impossible, beautiful ideas, houses built around ancient trees, schools with slides instead of stairs, public benches shaped like sleeping dragons. He had a gift for seeing the potential for magic in the mundane, that Arthur was now a ghost, a faint echo in the corridors of his mind. Every time a flicker of that old dream resurfaced, another, more powerful force would rise to meet it. This force was quiet, reasonable, and profoundly convincing. It was the voice of the excuse. On a Tuesday evening, scrolling through a design blog, he saw a competition to design a new reading nook for the local library. The ghost of young Arthur stirred. You could do that. It whispered. Just a small sketch. Immediately, the other voice responded, calm and rational. I'm too tired tonight. My day was exhausting. I'll have more creative energy this weekend. The weekend, of course, would come and go, filled with errands and television, and the deadline would pass. Another time, A friend who knew of his old passion sent him a link to an online course for 3D modeling software. It's free for the first month, his friend texted. The ghost of young Arthur felt a spark. This is the skill you're missing, it urged. The voice of excuse answered smoothly. I don't have the right computer for that. The software would probably run too slowly. It would just be frustrating. I'll do it when I get a new laptop. The laptop, of course, was never a priority. I'm too old to start a new career. The market is too competitive. I need to be realistic. I'll start when things settle down. Each excuse was a perfectly polished stone, smooth and easy to hold. It felt logical. It felt safe. What Arthur didn't see was that with every excuse he uttered, he was laying a brick. He was building a structure around himself, a silent, invisible prison. He called it the room of someday. The room of someday was, in its own way, comfortable. The walls were thick, muffling the loud, demanding sounds of the outside world, the sounds of opportunity, of challenge, of risk. Inside his room, there was no failure. There was no rejection. There was no struggle. There was only the calm, gray stillness of potential that was never acted upon. The air was thick with the echoes of I will, I might, and tomorrow. He was becoming an expert, not in architecture, but in excuses. He was the master architect of his own stagnation, and the prison he was building was so comfortable, so familiar, that he had mistaken it for a home. He didn't feel the bars, because the bars were woven from his own reasonable thoughts. He was the prisoner, the guard, and the architect, all in one, and he didn't even know it. Part 2. The first seed. The catalyst for change is rarely a dramatic explosion. More often, it is a quiet crack, a tiny fissure in the foundation of our comfortable reality. For Arthur, that crack appeared on a rainy Saturday afternoon while cleaning out his dusty attic. He stumbled upon a large, leather-bound portfolio. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. It was his final project from design school, a place he hadn't thought about in over a decade. Inside were breathtakingly detailed drawings of his dream project, the Living Library. It was a library built into the side of a hill, with glass ceilings that opened to the sky, reading rooms that overlooked a flowing stream, and a central chamber where a giant, ancient oak tree grew through the center of the building. It was ambitious. It was magical. It was alive. As Arthur looked at the vibrant, hopeful drawings, and then looked around at the gray, dusty reality of his life, something inside him broke. The comfort of his prison suddenly felt like suffocation. The silence he had mistaken for peace now sounded like an absence of life. For the first time, he saw the walls of the room of someday for what they were: not a shelter, but a cage. A profound sadness washed over him, so deep and heavy it felt like a physical weight. He had not just abandoned a dream, he had betrayed the young man who dared to have it. He sat there for an hour, the portfolio open on his lap, as the rain pattered against the roof. The voice of excuse tried to comfort him. It wasn't meant to be. Life gets in the way. You made a practical choice. For the first time, its words sounded hollow, like a lie he had told himself too many times. He went downstairs, not to the television, but to the small, unused desk in the corner of his living room. It was buried under a pile of bills and junk mail. He cleared it off, his movements slow and deliberate. He found a pencil, a cheap one from a stationery store, and a blank sheet of printer paper. He told himself he wasn't going to design a library. He wasn't going to start a new career. He wasn't going to change his life. The goal was too big, too terrifying. It would just invite the excuses back in. Instead, He gave himself a single, ridiculously small task. Draw one straight line. His hand, clumsy and hesitant after years of disuse, picked up the pencil. He pressed the graphite to the paper and drew a line across the page. It wasn't perfectly straight. It was a little shaky, but it was there. It was an action. It was a mark made in the present moment, not a promise deferred to an imaginary future. And then, a strange thing happened. Metaphorically, in the barren, dusty land outside the walls of his invisible prison, a single, tiny green seed, impossibly small, pushed its way through the cracked earth. It was nothing more than a speck of life, almost invisible. But it was a beginning. He hadn't torn down a wall. He had planted a seed. He had just started a new kind of construction, the Garden of Now. Part 3. Cultivating the Garden. The next day, Arthur felt the familiar pull of his old routine. The television was calling to him. The voice of excuse was ready with its soothing logic. You did something yesterday. You can take a break today. Don't push yourself too hard. But the memory of the single line and the strange feeling of agency it had produced was still fresh. He looked at the blank piece of paper next to the first one. I don't have time to do a full drawing, he thought. This was the voice of excuse, setting up an impossibly high bar. But then, a new voice, quieter but clearer, answered back. It was the voice of the habit. You don't need to do a full drawing, just draw a square. So he did. He drew a small, simple square. It took 10 seconds. Outside the room of someday, another tiny green sprout pushed through the soil next to the first one. This became Arthur's new secret game. It was a battle of tiny actions against giant excuses. He learned to identify the excuse, recognize its true nature, and counter it with a ridiculously small, non-threatening action. Excuse: I don't know where to even begin with modern design. Action: I will watch one 5-minute YouTube video about a famous architect. In the garden, a small, colorful wildflower bloomed. Excuse: I'm too tired to be creative after work. Action: I will simply look at my old sketchbook for 3 minutes before I turn on the TV. In the garden, the roots of the sprouts grew a little deeper, anchoring them more firmly in the soil. Excuse: it's pointless. I'll never be as good as I used to be. Action: I will trace one of my old designs just to feel the pencil move. In the garden, a delicate vine began to creep its way across the ground. He never focused on the outcome. He only focused on the repetition, the simple act of showing up. Some days he only managed to draw a single circle. On others, feeling a rare surge of inspiration, he might spend a whole hour sketching a staircase or a window frame. Each action, no matter how small, was another drop of water on his fledgling garden. The magic of habits, he was discovering, is that they are a form of compound interest for the soul. The first few actions seemed insignificant, a few sprouts in a vast wasteland. But over weeks, then months, the cumulative effect was undeniable. The garden began to grow. Small shrubs appeared, then flowering bushes. The ground became soft and fertile. The air, once dry and dusty, now smelled of damp earth and blooming life. And as the Garden of Now flourished, the room of someday began to decay. With every small act of creation, a crack would appear in the prison walls. With every excuse he defeated, a little mortar would crumble. Sunlight, for the first time in years, began to stream through the fissures, illuminating the gray, dusty interior of his self-made prison. His identity was changing. He was no longer Arthur, the man who was going to be an architect. He was becoming Arthur, the man who sketches every day. The shift was subtle but profound. He was no longer defined by a future promise, but by a present action. He wasn't waiting for a grand moment of inspiration to feel proud. He felt a quiet satisfaction in the simple, daily act of tending to his garden, of choosing the habit over the excuse. Part 4: Freedom and Responsibility. About 6 months into his quiet transformation, Arthur saw a poster at his local coffee shop. The city was announcing its annual Green Space Initiative, a competition for local residents to design a small community park for a neglected, empty lot in his neighborhood. The grand prize was modest, but the winner's design would actually be built. The ghost of young Arthur, now stronger and more present than ever, roared to life. This is it. This is what you do. But the room of someday, though crumbling, was not yet gone. Its ruins still stood, and from them, the oldest, most powerful excuses screamed at him. You're not a real architect. You'll be laughed at. You've just been doodling. This is a real project. You'll fail, and it will prove that you were right to give up all those years ago. The fear was immense. It felt like a physical force, pushing him back towards the safety of his routine, towards the comfortable gray numbness. He could feel the cracks in the prison walls starting to seal themselves back up. He went home that night and couldn't bring himself to sketch. He turned on the television, the familiar blue light washing over him. The excuses were winning. It's safer this way, they whispered. No risk, no pain. He went to bed feeling hollow, but as he lay in the dark, he thought about his garden. He pictured the vibrant flowers, the strong shrubs, the sweet smell of life, and then he pictured the gray, dusty room of echoes. He realized he was standing at a precipice. He could retreat into the ruins of his prison, or he could choose to live in his garden. This was the moment he finally understood the deepest lesson. When he made excuses, he was giving his power away to circumstance. He was a victim of his tiredness, his lack of time, his fear. He was telling a story where he was not the main character, but a helpless bystander. Responsibility, he now saw, was not a burden. It was freedom. To take responsibility meant accepting it all. It meant accepting that he was the one who had built the prison. Brick by brick, he was responsible for the lost years. But it also meant that he was the one who had planted the garden, seed by seed. He was the author of both his stagnation and his growth. And if he was the author, he could decide how the next chapter was written. He got out of bed, went to his desk, and with a clarity he hadn't felt in 20 years, he wrote at the top of a fresh piece of paper, "The Pocket Park of Possibility," by Arthur Pendleton. He took full responsibility, not for winning, not for being the best, but for trying, for honoring the dream. In that moment of total acceptance, a great tremor shook the foundations of his inner world. The remaining walls of the room of someday didn't just crumble, they disintegrated into fine dust. And that dust, once the very substance of his prison, was carried by a gentle wind and scattered over his garden, where it became rich, fertile soil. The prison had literally become the foundation for his growth. Arthur worked on the design for the next 4 weeks. He poured all the rediscovered passion, all the quiet, daily practice, into the project. He designed a small park with a winding path, benches that curved like fallen leaves, and a central story tree where children could sit and read. It was simple. It was heartfelt. It was his. He submitted it on the final day, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Conclusion: the echo of a new song. Arthur Pendleton did not win the competition. His design was awarded a special commendation for creative vision, but another, more practical design was chosen. For a fleeting moment, the old voice of excuse tried to whisper, "See, it was all for nothing." But the voice was weak, a faint echo in a vast sunlit garden. Arthur didn't feel disappointment. He felt alive. The act of creating, of taking the risk, of being fully responsible, that was the real prize. The commendation was just a bonus. His life didn't magically transform overnight. He still worked his data entry job, but everything was different. Because he was different. He started taking on small freelance design projects. He redesigned a friend's back patio. He volunteered to help design the stage for a local theater group. He was no longer living in the echo of what could have been. He was composing a new song, note by daily note. He was the architect of his days, his actions, his life. His story brings us back to that fundamental choice we all face. Every single moment. The choice between the comfortable prison of our excuses and the patient, daily work of cultivating our garden. Excuses build walls. They promise safety, but deliver only stagnation. Habits plant seeds. They demand patience, but deliver growth, strength, and eventually, freedom. So, I leave you with this challenge, the same one Arthur learned to live by. Tonight, before you go to sleep, take a quiet moment and ask yourself a simple question. What did I train today? Did I practice my excuses, or did I practice my habits? Did I lay another brick in a prison wall, or did I water a seed in my garden? Your answer won't just define your day. It will define your weeks, your years, and ultimately, your life. Don't let your life become a recording of repeated excuses. Let it be the masterpiece you build, one small, deliberate, beautiful action at a time. Thank you for listening.